The PA system crackled, announcing the mill's immediate closure. Roger Hansen, standing on a makeshift stage, watched us pack our boxes. He caught my eye, then smirked. "Some men," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "were never cut out for anything more than splinters and sawdust." The smell of pine dust clung to my jacket as I carried the last box out to the truck. 200 men, all with the same stunned look, milled around the parking lot. Roger Hansen, perched on a stack of lumber pallets near the main gate, was still talking to a reporter. He gestured vaguely toward us, then laughed. The afternoon sun beat down, making the gravel shimmer. I got into the old Ford, the engine already idling, and drove home. Martha was sitting at the kitchen table, a half-empty mug of coffee cooling in front of her. The newspaper lay open beside it, the headline bold and unforgiving. She didn't look up when I walked in. "The mill, Dale," she said, her voice flat. "Closed down." It wasn't a question, she knew. I pulled out a chair, letting my box of tools slide to the floor. They called it an unexpected market shift. No warning. She finally looked at me, her gaze heavy. "Your father never had trouble holding a job. He always found a way to provide." The words hung there, unspoken but clear. I was not my father. He died before I was old enough to truly know him, but his ghost, the image of his steadfast presence, always seemed to shadow my own efforts. Vera, my sister, walked in from the living room, her phone still pressed to her ear. She was already dressed for her evening shift at the diner. She nodded at me, then pulled the phone from her ear. "Mom, Dale, you heard about the mill?" She didn't wait for an answer. "Well, you can always move back in for a bit, Dale. It's not ideal, but it's practical. Save on rent." Her tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. No anger, no sympathy, just a calculated solution. Ellie was already home from her job at the library. She sat on the couch, staring at the muted television screen. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white. When I sat beside her, she leaned her head on my shoulder. "What does this mean for us, Dale?" Her voice was small, tight with worry. "We were just starting to get ahead. The down payment for the house. The wedding next year." I wrapped an arm around her, feeling the tremor in her body. "I'll find something. There's always work." But even as I said it, I knew the words sounded hollow. This town, built on timber, offered little else when the mill shut down. "Mark always had a plan," she murmured, almost to herself. Mark, her college ex-boyfriend. He'd gone off to the city, making something of himself, stable and secure. It was a phantom, his name, a reminder of what she'd left behind for me and for this town. The comparison stung, though she hadn't meant it to. She just needed stability, something I now struggled to offer. The next morning, I drove back to the mill office. Roger Hansen was packing his own office, a stack of golf magazines on his polished oak desk. He looked up, surprised to see me. "Miller, I thought you'd be long gone." "Severance package," I said, my voice steady. "And what about the workers? Some of these men have been here 30 years. Roger waved a dismissive hand. "Business decisions, Miller. The market shifted. No future in lumber for this region. You think I enjoy this? I'm taking a hit too." He picked up an envelope from his desk. "Here, 2 weeks for every 5 years. It's more than fair." He pushed it across the desk. "You never had the vision, Miller. Always just doing what was told. Never thinking about the bigger picture." The check was insultingly small, a pittance for 12 years of sweat and loyalty. When I got home, Ellie was waiting, dressed in her Sunday best, not for church, but for something else. "I had an interview, Dale." She took a deep breath. "A teaching position in Grand Rapids. They said I'm a strong candidate." Grand Rapids was 3 hours away, a world apart. "They need to know by Friday." She looked at me, her eyes pleading, but firm. "It's a good opportunity. For us, for stability. You could find work there, too." The unspoken weight of her words settled between us. Come with me, or I go alone. I felt the walls closing in, the small mounds suddenly suffocating. My father had worked these same woods, built this same house with his hands. His legacy was tied to this place, and so was mine. Leaving felt like a betrayal, a final admission of failure to my family, to myself. Aunt Lois came by later that week, her flowered apron still tied around her waist. She brought a casserole. Ellie's a good girl, Dale, she said, stirring her tea. You're still young. You need a reliable man, someone who can take care of things. Her eyes flickered to Martha, then back to me. Your father, he had his moments, but he always worked hard in the end, always put food on the table, even if things were tight. She never said what moments my father had, but I knew what she meant. The whispers, the late nights, the times the bills piled up until Martha had to ask Uncle Randy for a loan. My father, the stoic provider, had his own quiet battles, battles I was now fighting myself, only louder, more public. The pressure mounted, a dull ache in my chest. Martha's disappointment, Vera's practical dismissal, Ellie's quiet ultimatum, Aunt Lois's pointed advice. The town, once my shelter, now felt like a cage, its walls steadily closing. The June sun, bright and unwavering, streamed through the large barn doors, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The scent of hay and wildflowers hung heavy, a rustic perfume. We had chosen the old hayloft, painstakingly restored for its simple beauty. Everything felt perfect, a brief respite from the anxieties that had been gnawing at me since the mill shut down. Ellie walked down the aisle, her dark hair pinned up with small white roses, a simple ivory dress skimming her frame. She didn't look like a woman burdened by the world. She looked like light itself. When her eyes met mine, a quiet smile touched her lips, and for a moment the future seemed clear, full of possibilities. The murmurs of the guests, the hum of the small string quartet, all faded. There was only Ellie. We stood before Reverend Davies, our hands clasped, our voices steady. Ellie's vows were soft, sincere. I promise to be your safe harbor in every storm, your brightest light in the darkest night, she said, her thumb tracing patterns on my hand. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a belief in something solid, something enduring. Later, at the reception, the air grew thick with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Aunt Lois, already a few drinks deep, stood by the punch bowl, her face flushed. She picked up a spoon and clinked it against a half-full champagne flute, the sound cutting through the din. Martha, my mother, shot her a warning look, trying to catch her eye, but Lois was beyond subtle cues. Attention, everyone. A toast, she slurred, her voice a little too loud. She raised her glass, swaying slightly. To Dale, she began, her smile widening. A good, trusting boy, just like his father. Always sees the best in people, bless his heart. Then her gaze shifted to Ellie, and her smile sharpened, revealing something cold and hard. And to his bride, who certainly knows how to reinvent herself. A ripple of unease spread through the room. My stomach twisted. Lois continued, her voice growing louder, more piercing. It takes a certain kind of woman to come back from what she did. 2 years ago, wasn't it, dear? A little problem with her married boss, Roger Hansen. My jaw clenched. Roger Hansen, the name felt like a punch. Had to get rid of it, didn't you? Before his wife found out. The noise of the reception died, replaced by a sudden, heavy silence. The clinking glasses, the laughter, the music all gone. I couldn't breathe. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the barn. Ellie sat at our table, across from me, her face utterly devoid of color, her eyes wide and fixed, like a prey animal caught in a headlight beam. I tried to stand, to say something, anything. No, I managed, the word a weak whisper. That's not true. But a cold doubt was already creeping in. Ellie had never mentioned any of this. She'd worked for Hansen for a short time before the library, then left abruptly. She'd always said it was a bad fit. Lois just smirked, a cruel triumph in her eyes. Ask her about Roger Hansen, Dale. Ask her about the settlement she took. Then May, Ellie's younger sister, erupted. She launched herself from her chair, overturning it, and lunged toward Aunt Lois, her face contorted in fury. You spiteful witch, she screamed, her voice cracking. Martha and Uncle Randy were already scrambling to pull May back, but the damage was done. Whispers broke out, then louder murmurs. Guests started gathering their things, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. Ellie's parents huddled together, her mother openly weeping into her husband's shoulder. But Ellie herself remained still, her hands still folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the barn's open doors. I stood over her, reaching for her hand. Ellie, I urged, my voice raw, we have to go. She didn't respond, didn't move. I gently pulled her arm and she rose, moving like a doll, walking out of the barn without a backward glance. I followed her, weaving through the stunned faces of our friends and family. I found her in the small bridal suite we'd rented, a room adjacent to the barn. She stood before a mirror, her back to me, slowly pulling the small white roses from her hair, one by one. Her movements were precise, deliberate. "Ellie," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She turned then, her eyes empty, devoid of emotion. "Is it important to you, Dale?" Her voice was flat, without inflection. "The truth of what she said?" I hesitated. The truth. The cold, hard truth. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the woman before me, the woman I had just married, with the accusations. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. She nodded once, a slow, deliberate movement. "Then we have nothing to talk about." "No," I protested, stepping forward, desperation clawing at my throat. "Ellie, please. Is it true?" Just then the door opened, and May stepped in, her face still streaked with tears, but her jaw set. In her hand, she carried a battered leather briefcase. She placed it on a small table by the window, unsnapping the latches. Inside, neatly stacked, were files, police reports, medical records, court transcripts, the stark, undeniable evidence of a life I knew nothing about. The fluorescent light in the bridal suite cast a harsh glow on the documents. May, her voice tight with suppressed anger, laid out the facts. Roger Hansen, the man who'd fired me, was more than just a boss to Ellie. He had been her supervisor at a prestigious research institution, a man of considerable wealth and influence in the state capital, married to a state senator's daughter. Untouchable, it seemed. The police report detailed a night 2 years ago. Ellie had been working late, alone in the lab. Hansen had cornered her, his words a chilling mix of compliments and threats. He'd made it clear that her promising career, her entire future in academia, depended on her compliance. When she resisted, he physically assaulted her. The details were clinical, stark, and utterly devastating to read. Ellie, despite the threats, had reported him. She was young, driven, and believed in justice. The investigation had begun, but then it stalled. Witnesses suddenly became unavailable. Evidence disappeared. The district attorney, under immense political pressure, eventually dismissed the case, citing insufficient evidence. The words were like a branding iron on the page. Hansen's lawyers, swift and ruthless, launched a counteroffensive. They painted Ellie as unstable, vindictive, a disgruntled employee making false claims to ruin a respected man. They attacked her character, her mental state, her very integrity. Her academic reputation, once pristine, was shredded. She started having panic attacks, debilitating bouts of depression. Her dissertation advisor, a woman she deeply admired, gently advised her to drop out for her own health. That was when May, fresh out of law school, stepped in. She helped Ellie sue Hansen for emotional distress and wrongful termination. They settled out of court a sum that barely covered her extensive medical bills and lost wages. A non-disclosure agreement was part of the deal. She had to stay silent. It was the only way she could get any semblance of justice and move on with her life. Ellie, resilient and determined, didn't give up on her dreams. She transferred to another university, started over, and finished her doctorate. She was Dr. Hayes now, a clinical psychologist, working at the library while she built her private practice. The past was buried professionally and personally. "I didn't tell you," Ellie said, her voice soft but steady, "because it was over. It was buried." She looked at me, her eyes holding a depth of pain I hadn't seen before. "It wasn't part of who I am now. I didn't want it to define our future, our marriage. I wanted us to start clean." I felt a wave of nausea, a mix of horror, shame, and a searing anger. Horror at what she had endured. Shame for my own fleeting doubt, for letting Aunt Lois's cruel words plant a seed of suspicion, and a burning rage at my family, especially Aunt Lois, for their malicious cruelty, for unearthing such a painful, buried secret on our wedding day. They hadn't just insulted Ellie. They had torn open old wounds, publicly humiliated her for something she had fought so hard to overcome. I reached for her hand, my fingers trembling as I intertwined them with hers. "I believe you, Ellie," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And I'm so sorry for all of it, for what you went through, for my family, for my hesitation. Her past, this nightmare, made her stronger, not weaker. It didn't change who she was to me. It only deepened my respect, my admiration, my love. This changes nothing between us. I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. The next morning, after a long, quiet night in a small, impersonal motel room, I drafted a public statement. I would send it to the local paper, post it online, make sure everyone in town heard it. My wife, Dr. Eleanor Hayes, and I were married yesterday, I wrote, my pen pressing hard against the paper. Our joy was marred by malicious falsehoods spread by a family member who revealed private information stemming from a traumatic experience my wife endured years ago. I want to make it unequivocally clear that I stand by my wife completely. I love her. I am incredibly proud of her strength and resilience. These baseless attacks will not overshadow our commitment to each other, nor will they deter us from building our life together. I wouldn't name Aunt Lois directly, but everyone would know. The local newspaper printed my statement on page 3, tucked between an article about rising gas prices and a school bake sale announcement. But online, it was a different story. The comments section beneath the paper's website post exploded. Hundreds of messages poured in, support for Ellie, outrage at Aunt Lois, and a growing wave of criticism against my family. The phone rang that evening and I knew it was Martha before I even answered. Her voice, when it came through, was a raw, furious scream. How could you, Dale? How could you betray your own family like this? Calling Lois a liar? Calling us liars? Her accusations blurred together. That woman, that Dr. Hayes has filled your head with nonsense. She's ripping us apart. Vera called shortly after, her tone cooler, more insidious. Dale, you need to think about what you're doing. Ellie's playing the victim. She's isolating you from us. You're letting her tear our family apart. She made it sound like I was being manipulated, a puppet on Ellie's strings. A few days later, a mandatory family dinner was arranged at Aunt Lois's house, a silent summons that felt more like a tribunal. The tension was suffocating. Martha sat stiffly at the head of the table, her face a mask of disappointment. Uncle Randy kept his eyes on his plate. Aunt Lois refused to look at me, her mouth a thin line. Finally, after an hour of forced small talk, Martha slammed her hand on the table, rattling the silverware. This has gone far enough, Dale, she said, her voice shaking with barely contained fury. You have to choose, us or her. This woman who has turned you against your own blood. The ultimatum hung in the air, cold and definitive. Ellie, during all this, maintained a quiet composure. She continued her work at the library, saw her few private clients. But I saw the toll it took. The dark circles under her eyes, the way she sometimes flinched when the phone rang. The whispers at work, the sidelong glances. She never complained, never showed weakness to anyone but me. Her resilience, her quiet strength, became a constant reminder of why I chose her. It solidified my resolve. May called one afternoon, her voice tight with a new urgency. Dale, you're not going to believe this. I was doing some digging. Remember Roger Hansen? My blood ran cold. Yes. He's being vetted for a federal judgeship, a lifetime appointment. May paused, then continued, her voice grim. His background check will be intense. The NDA that Ellie signed? It protects him. It keeps this whole ugly business buried. It makes him look clean. A federal judgeship. The thought of Hansen, a man who had abused his power and ruined lives, sitting on a federal bench dispensing justice, was sickening. I looked at Ellie, who had been listening from the couch. She closed her eyes, a shadow of pain crossing her face. Ellie, I said, my voice quiet, if we don't do something. She opened her eyes, meeting my gaze. I know, she whispered. The thought of revisiting that nightmare, exposing herself again, was clearly agonizing. But the injustice, the thought of Hansen elevated to such a position, was equally unbearable. I'll do it, she said, her voice barely audible. I'll go public. We wasted no time. May connected us with an ethics lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davies, who specialized in NDAs and whistleblowers. We sat in her downtown office, the hum of city traffic a distant backdrop, as she explained the risks, the potential legal battles, the inevitable smear campaigns. Hanson's team will come at you hard, Dr. Hayes, she warned. They'll dig up anything, everything to discredit you. She was right. Within days, the first veiled threats appeared. Anonymous calls to Ellie's workplace, questions asked about her past by unknown individuals. We knew it was Hanson. He was already digging, looking for ammunition. I knew then that I had to be more than just supportive in private. I had to be public. I agreed to appear on a local news segment, a short interview about the mill's closure, but I saw it as an opportunity. The reporter, a young woman named Sarah, asked about the family drama. I looked directly into the camera. My family means a lot to me, I said, my voice steady. But loyalty, true loyalty, isn't just about blood. It's about standing by someone when they need you most. And right now, my wife needs me. I spoke about Ellie's strength, her character, without revealing the details of her past. I stood by her side, a silent vow renewed in the harsh glare of the television lights. The segment only deepened the chasm between me and my family. Martha refused to answer my calls. Vera unfriended me on social media. I realized with a chilling clarity that I was truly on my own with Ellie, against Hanson, against the establishment, and against my own kin. The battle lines were drawn. The fluorescent lights of the Huddle conference room glared down on us. Outside, beyond the drawn blinds, a small crowd of reporters and camera crews had gathered. Their murmurs, a low hum. Ellie stood at the podium, a sheet of notes clutched in her hand. May stood beside her, a hand on her back, a silent anchor. I stood a step behind, my presence a visible statement of solidarity. Ellie's voice, when she began to speak, was clear, though a tremor was barely perceptible beneath her composure. She broke the NDA, laying bare the details of Roger Hanson's assault, the police investigation that went nowhere, the smear campaign, and the forced silence. Each word was a truth carved from deep pain. Before she had even finished, Hanson's PR machine kicked into gear. A press release hit the wires, dismissing Ellie's allegations as baseless fabrications from a disgruntled former employee seeking to derail a distinguished public servant's career. He denied everything unequivocally. The story exploded. It was everywhere, cable news, morning talk shows, online forums. Ellie was suddenly a national figure. Some outlets portrayed her as a brave hero, a symbol of resilience. Others, fueled by Hanson's PR team, painted her as a scorned woman, a vengeful opportunist, mentally unstable. The personal attacks were relentless. Details of her life, meticulously unearthed and twisted, were leaked to tabloid sites. Her academic struggles, a brief minor traffic incident from college, even a contentious argument with a former roommate, all were blown out of proportion, used to chip away at her credibility. Ellie, remarkably, held strong. She compartmentalized, she said, leaning on her training. She continued to see her patients, drawing strength from their trust, from the quiet act of helping others. She moved through her days with a quiet dignity that baffled her detractors. But I saw the cracks. The way her eyes would drift to the television screen in a waiting room, the tension in her jaw as she scrolled past a news headline on her phone. The weight of it pressed down on me too. The endless media calls, the unsolicited advice from strangers, the feeling of living under a microscope. It was a constant, exhausting battle. Every choice we made felt amplified, every word dissected. But my resolve, fueled by my belief in Ellie, never wavered. This was the right fight, no matter the cost. My phone, however, became a relentless source of condemnation. Martha's voicemails piled up, each one more venomous than the last. "You're ruining our name, Dale, destroying everything your father worked for." Her texts were shorter, sharper. Disgrace, shame, turncoat. Vera, meanwhile, worked behind the scenes. Through mutual friends, I heard the whispers. Ellie was manipulative, a gold digger. I was deluded, blind. They had chosen their side. May, on the other hand, worked tirelessly with her small team of legal volunteers. The attention on Hanson was bringing things to light. Anonymous tips started trickling in. Other women cautiously, tentatively reached out, hinting at similar experiences with Hanson. Discrepancies in his financial records, questionable dealings during his previous appointments, the threads were slowly weaving a darker tapestry. One night, the weight became too much for Ellie. After a particularly brutal day of online attacks, She curled up on the couch, her face buried in her hands. The quiet strength she usually projected crumbled. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. I sat beside her, pulling her close. "Dale," she whispered, her voice raw. What if, what if I'm making a mistake? What if this is too much?" She looked up at me, her eyes clouded with despair. "What if we lose everything?" I held her tighter, pressing my face into her hair, inhaling the faint scent of lavender. "We're in this together, Ellie," I said, my voice low and firm. "Whatever happens, we face it together. You are stronger than you know, and we are doing the right thing. For you, for justice, for all those others he might have hurt." Her shoulders still trembled, but she leaned into me, a silent admission of her fear and her trust. Life's most costly choices often test the very fabric of our being, forcing us to confront not just the world, but ourselves. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The summons arrived by certified mail, delivered by a grim-faced man in a crisp suit. Roger Hansen was suing Ellie for defamation. His lawsuit claimed that her baseless accusations had irrevocably damaged his reputation and jeopardized his judicial nomination. My heart sank, but May was unperturbed. "It's a classic move," May explained, tapping a pen against her legal pad. "Intimidation. They want to bury her in legal fees and scare her into silence. But it also gives us a public forum to present our evidence, a place where he can't just dismiss it as tabloid fodder." Her words were meant to be reassuring, but the reality of another legal battle was daunting. The financial strain was immediate. We had already spent most of our savings on legal consultations and living expenses since I'd lost my job. Now, with a full-blown lawsuit, the costs escalated dramatically. I started looking into selling the small plot of land my father had left me, the land I had planned to build our future on. It felt like another piece of me was being chipped away. The challenges mounted. One potential witness, a former assistant of Hansen's who had initially offered to corroborate some of Ellie's claims, suddenly recanted her statement. She cited personal reasons, but the fear in her voice during our last call was palpable. We suspected intimidation. Then the insidious leaks began. Tabloid websites and obscure online forums started publishing snippets of private conversations I'd had with my family, distorted anecdotes, all painting Ellie in the worst possible light. Dale Miller's estranged mother fears for his judgment. Wife's troubled past known to local family. The articles didn't mention my family by name, but the details were too specific, too personal. It became clear that someone close to me was feeding information to Hansen's team, or directly to the media. My thoughts immediately went to my mother and Vera. Martha, especially, made unsettling comments. One evening during a terse phone call I placed to her about Uncle Randy's health, she said Ellie should just drop this. This new strategy of hers, it's not going to work. Hansen's too powerful. Her words were too specific. How could she know about our legal strategy, which we had kept strictly confidential? Vera became even more evasive. When I tried to ask her about the articles, about who she might have talked to, she was always busy, always had to run. Her phone calls grew shorter, her explanations more vague. The suspicion festered, a cold knot in my stomach. A few weeks later, another blow landed. A critical piece of evidence, an old, informal memo from another former employee detailing a separate complaint against Hansen, was ruled inadmissible due to a technicality. The judge, tight-lipped and precise, cited improper chain of custody. Ellie's shoulders slumped in the courtroom, her carefully constructed composure briefly faltering. The depositions began. Days of them. Ellie endured grueling cross-examinations, forced to relive her trauma, dissecting every painful detail of the assault, her life afterwards, her feelings, her motives. She walked out of those sessions emotionally drained, her eyes hollow. I was there for every single one, holding her hand, passing her water, a silent, unwavering presence. She leaned on me heavily. It was all I could offer. One damp Tuesday evening, I went to my old house to pick up some more of my father's tools. I needed them to fix a leaky faucet in our small rental. As I rummaged through a dusty box in the attic, looking for a wrench, I stumbled upon an old manila envelope labeled family papers. Inside, amongst old insurance policies and faded birth certificates, I found a printout of a series of emails. My mother, Martha, had exchanged them with a woman named Brenda Jenkins. The subject lines were innocuous enough at first: family concerns, mutual acquaintances. But as I scrolled through, a chill snaked down my spine. Brenda Jenkins was listed on a quick internet search as a senior PR strategist for the very firm that was representing Roger Hansen. The emails detailed my mother's concerns about Ellie's character, offered insights into our family dynamics, and even discussed ways to manage the narrative around Ellie's public accusations. The hard truth hit me like a physical blow. My own mother, the woman who had demanded I choose between her and Ellie, was actively collaborating with the man who had assaulted my wife. The betrayal was so profound, so sickening, it made the rest of the world blur. The emails felt heavy in my hand, their printed words a stark accusation. I drove straight to Martha's house, the old Ford roaring louder than usual. I found her in the kitchen, meticulously arranging flowers in a vase. She looked up, her smile fading when she saw my face. "What is it, Dale?" she asked, her voice tight. I didn't answer directly. I just held out the printouts. "Brenda Jenkins," I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet it felt like a shout in the small room. "The PR firm working for Roger Hansen. You've been collaborating with them." Her face went pale. She tried to deny it at first, a weak, flustered stammer about looking into things, about trying to understand. But then the carefully constructed facade crumbled. She sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. "I thought I was saving you, Dale," she sobbed, her words muffled. "That woman, she's not good for you. She's ruined everything. Your inheritance, your good name. I thought she was after your father's land. Your money, I was protecting you." The accusation, the warped justification, was almost more sickening than the betrayal itself. She hadn't just feared for me. She had actively undermined my wife, believing a manufactured narrative. I felt a cold, dead weight settle in my chest. "And Vera?" I asked, my voice flat. "Did Vera know?" She nodded, still weeping. She just thought I was being cautious. She agreed it was best to keep an eye on things. A profound sense of disgust washed over me, not just for their actions, but for the twisted logic that drove them. Their protection had been a vicious act of sabotage, driven by greed and a prejudiced fear of Ellie. They had chosen to believe the worst, to act on it, to become complicit in Hansen's continued campaign of abuse. I called Ellie from the car. Her reaction when I told her was heartbreaking. She wasn't surprised by the malice, she said, not anymore. She'd faced it for years. But the extent of the sabotage, from inside what was supposed to be my family, from people who should have loved and supported me, that stung. It was another cut, another proof that some wounds never truly healed. May, ever the lawyer, saw the practical implications. Martha's actions, if proven, could be construed as obstruction of justice, witness tampering, she explained carefully. It could have legal repercussions, but it could also complicate our case against Hansen, making it look like family drama, or worse, making Ellie seem vindictive. I was faced with an agonizing decision. Expose my mother, further splinter my already fractured family, and potentially harm Ellie's case, or keep it quiet, protect my family's name, and let the betrayal fester. The thought of letting my mother get away with it, of allowing her complicity to go unpunished, felt like another betrayal of Ellie. But exposing her, facing the public spectacle of it all, felt like a public execution of my own family. The next day I went back. Vera was there, nodding stiffly beside Martha, her face pale. My mother looked drawn, her eyes red-rimmed. I stood in the doorway, the distance between us wider than the room itself. "Your actions," I said, my voice firm, without anger, "they are unforgivable. I cannot have this in my life. I cannot be part of a family that believes this way, that acts this way." And there was no more yelling, no more threats, just a cold, final declaration. I turned and walked out, leaving them in the silence of their choices. Ellie and I issued a quiet statement to our small, trusted network of friends and colleagues, confirming the division within my family without detailing Martha's specific actions. It was enough for them to know that we were standing firm, that our choices were made. It was a strategic move, protecting Ellie's legal standing, preventing Hansen's lawyers from spinning it as a personal vendetta. The betrayal was a fresh, raw wound, but it also became a catalyst. My anger, no longer diffused by confusion or doubt, solidified into an unwavering resolve. Hansen had to be stopped. Justice had to be served. May, sensing my renewed determination, began to adjust our legal strategy. "We can use this," she said, her eyes gleaming with a new purpose. "The leaks, the smear campaign, your mother's involvement, it all demonstrates a coordinated, organized effort to discredit Ellie. It paints a clear picture of Hansen's desperation." The fight, now more personal than ever, had a new focus. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former colleague of Hansen's, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, no relation to Brenda, thankfully, had been following the news. Disgusted by the vicious smear campaign against Ellie and emboldened by Ellie's unwavering courage, she came forward. She had worked closely with Hansen for years and had witnessed his predatory patterns firsthand. Sarah provided us with crucial internal documents, carefully logged complaints from other female employees, emails with thinly veiled threats, and even a memo that subtly acknowledged a pattern of behavior that needed to be managed. Her testimony, detailed and credible, corroborated Ellie's account perfectly, providing the objective, irrefutable evidence we had lacked. The media coverage shifted dramatically. The initial accusations against Ellie evaporated, replaced by headlines demanding accountability from Hansen. Public opinion, once divided, now swayed overwhelmingly in Ellie's favor. The narrative became clear: a powerful man abusing his position and a brave woman fighting for justice. Faced with mounting pressure, undeniable evidence, and the looming threat of Sarah's testimony in open court, Roger Hansen's judicial nomination was quietly withdrawn. The official statement cited personal reasons, but everyone knew the truth. His career, once on an unstoppable trajectory, had imploded. Soon after, Hansen's lawyers initiated serious settlement talks. They saw their case crumbling. The tide turned irrevocably against them. A public trial at this point would be a catastrophic defeat, exposing more of Hansen's misconduct. Before the negotiations began in earnest, I paid Martha one last visit. My voice was calm, devoid of the anger that had once consumed me. "Mother," I said, looking her directly in the eye, "I want you to understand something. If you or Vera ever again interfere with Ellie or spread another falsehood, I will cooperate fully with any legal action taken against you. I will not protect you." The words were heavy, a finality hanging in the air. Her face was pale, her defiance replaced by a chilling realization of the consequences. This was no longer a family squabble. It was a legal line she dared not cross. The Miller family, as I had known it, was permanently fractured. I severed ties with Martha and Vera. The decision was heavy, an amputation, but beneath the pain, there was a profound sense of peace. I had chosen, and my choice was Ellie. Ellie and May, sitting across from Hansen's legal team, negotiated the settlement on their own terms. Money, they agreed, was secondary. Ellie demanded a public apology from Hansen, an acknowledgement of his wrongdoing. She also insisted on a significant contribution from him to a national victims advocacy group, a sum large enough to make a real difference. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Hansen, through his lawyers, agreed to the terms. No full trial, no direct admission of guilt on his part in a courtroom, but the public apology and the massive contribution to the victims' fund were, in effect, his capitulation, his admission. A quiet victory, perhaps, but a victory nonetheless. Ellie felt a profound sense of closure, a weight lifted that she had carried for years. The long, agonizing battle was over. Ellie's parents, who had watched her endure so much, called immediately after the news broke. Her mother wept, not from sadness, but from immense pride and palpable relief. Her father, usually a quiet man, simply said, "We knew you'd find your way, darling. We always knew." That evening, after the last phone call had been made, the last email sent, Ellie and I sat on our small porch. The air was cool, the crickets chirping their nightly symphony. We held hands, silent. The battle was won, yes, but the scars, I knew, would always remain. On Ellie, on me, on my family. The cost of justice was high, but the price of silence would have been even higher. The headlines faded. The public moved on to the next sensation. Life, in its stubborn way, began to return to a semblance of normal, but it was a new normal, one shaped by the fire we had walked through. The intense scrutiny, the constant fighting, it was over. The silence felt almost unnerving at first. Ellie didn't retreat into her private practice. Instead, she stepped forward. She became a vocal advocate, a speaker at conferences, a consultant for victim support groups. Her experience, once a source of deep shame and trauma, became a powerful tool for change. She spoke with a quiet authority, her story a beacon for others who had suffered in silence. She wasn't just Dr. Hayes' clinical psychologist. She was a survivor, a force for justice. For my part, the easygoing man who had worked at the mill, blinded by the perceived simplicity of a small town, was gone. My naivety had been stripped away. I had learned in the hardest way possible about true loyalty, about integrity, and about the extraordinary strength of the woman I had married. The world was not as simple as I once thought, and the lines between right and wrong were often blurred by power and prejudice. Our marriage, forged in the crucible of public scrutiny and personal betrayal, was undeniably stronger. We had seen each other at our most vulnerable, our most desperate. We had fought side by side, and that shared purpose, that unwavering support, had become the bedrock of our life together. The house, the wedding, the dreams of a simple future. They had all been tested, twisted, but what remained was something far more resilient. Martha's messages still came, sporadic texts filled with vague regrets, veiled apologies that never quite met the mark. "Hope you're doing well, Dale. Thinking of you." I read them sometimes, but I never responded. The wound of her betrayal was too deep, too fundamental. The choice she had made, her willingness to sacrifice Ellie for what she perceived as my inheritance, was a chasm I couldn't bridge. Vera tried a few times too, with calls that felt hollow, attempts to reconnect that felt self-serving, as if she merely wanted to mend a broken social fabric rather than a broken relationship. I let them go to voicemail. I had learned that some relationships, once shattered, cannot be glued back together. Instead, Ellie and I cultivated a new circle of friends, a chosen family who had stood by us, offering quiet support, understanding glances, and unwavering belief. May, of course, was always there, not just as a sister and lawyer, but as a steadfast friend. We found solace in these connections, in the genuine warmth and respect that felt so starkly absent from my blood relatives. We sold the small rental house, too full of echoes, and found a quiet place on the edge of town, a little further out, with a small garden and a view of the woods. It wasn't the house my father had built, nor the one we had planned, but it was ours. We found peace in its quiet simplicity, far from the whispers and the weight of the past. Ellie continued her therapy, slowly, meticulously processing the trauma, the betrayal, the public ordeal. She wasn't defined by what had happened to her. She was empowered by her survival, by her fight, by her victory. It was a long road, but she walked it with grace. I often reflected on our journey, sitting on our new porch, watching the changing seasons. The greatest threats to happiness, I realized, didn't always come from the obvious external forces. Sometimes they came from within, from the very people you were supposed to trust, from hidden prejudices and unspoken fears. But true happiness, resilience, came from standing by those you loved, from choosing integrity over convenience, and from building a life on honesty, even when the foundations had been violently shaken. Our future was not the one we had imagined that perfect June afternoon. It was something deeper, richer, forged in the fires of adversity. It was a future built on the quiet understanding that while some wounds never fully heal, they can, paradoxically, lead to an unbreakable strength. The old lumber mill, a skeleton of its former self, stood on the edge of town, its metal siding peeling, its vast interior hollowed out. Crews were slowly dismantling it, piece by piece, a permanent monument to a past livelihood. I drove past it sometimes, a reminder of the years I'd spent inside, the years of steady work, the illusion of security. Now my days were filled with odd jobs, fixing leaky roofs, repairing fences, patching drywall. It was enough to get by, but the quiet anxiety of irregular work was a constant hum beneath the surface of my new life. I found a different kind of work, though, one that filled a deeper need. I started volunteering at the local youth center, teaching basic carpentry skills to a handful of teenagers who needed direction. I showed them how to measure twice and cut once, how to sand until the wood felt like silk, how to build something solid with their own hands. I saw something of myself in their quiet struggles, their search for purpose in a town that seemed to be shrinking around them. Ellie's advocacy work continued to grow. She spoke at state conferences, her voice measured and clear, sharing her story, offering her expertise. She was a respected voice now, a testament to the power of truth. Her visibility also brought new clients to her private practice, people drawn to her strength and her deep empathy. I watched her sometimes, speaking to a room full of strangers, or sitting with the client, her gaze steady and compassionate, and felt a quiet pride swell in my chest. Her trauma had been transformed, not into bitterness, but into a profound strength that benefited others. The emotional scars were still there, of course. They surfaced in quiet moments, a sudden pause in conversation, a faraway look in her eyes. But they were shared scars now, understood and acknowledged, making our bond deeper, more resilient. Our new house, on the quiet road just outside town, became a sanctuary, a place where we could simply be, free from judgment, free from the echoes of past drama. It was a modest house, smaller than the one my father built, but it felt more like home than any place I had ever known. It represented our resilience, our ability to build something solid on foundations that had once been shattered. I often thought about the meaning of strength. I had always associated it with physical labor, with the brute force of felling trees or swinging a hammer. But I had learned that true strength was an unwavering commitment, a quiet defiance in the face of injustice, a steadfast love for someone who had been wronged. It was in Ellie's voice when she spoke her truth, in May's tireless work, in the steady support of our chosen friends. The small town values I had once held so dear, community, family, tradition, had been redefined for me. They now meant integrity, loyalty, and the courage to stand against the very people who claimed to embody those values, but who had shown themselves to be hollow. The silence from my mother and sister remained a heavy, unspoken presence. There were times I missed the easy familiarity, the unquestioning loyalty of a blood bond. But the cost of that familiarity, the price of their approval, was too high. I understood that some betrayals cut too deep to ever fully heal, and that moving forward sometimes meant accepting what was lost and building a new path. Occasionally, we'd see Aunt Lois in town, her gaze quick to avert, her head turning sharply away. The tension lingered, a thread in the fabric of the small community, but it was distant now, a background noise that no longer held power over us. Life settled into a rhythm, a blend of quiet domesticity, meaningful work, and a profound shared sense of purpose. Our future was no longer defined by inherited expectations or the weight of a painful past. It was being built, day by day, on honesty, mutual respect, and the hard-won understanding that some wounds, while they may never entirely vanish, can lead to an unbreakable strength that allows you to face anything. The quiet hum of our new life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Ellie's advocacy work took her out of town a few times a month, speaking at women's shelters, offering workshops on trauma recovery. Her private practice grew steadily, her name passed by word of mouth from people seeking her particular brand of quiet strength and informed empathy. She was always busy but never overwhelmed, finding a balance that served both her purpose and her peace. I continued with my handyman work, the physical labor still a familiar comfort. I found satisfaction in fixing things, in the tangible proof of repair. The old Ford, reliable as ever, carried me from one job to the next, through the back roads and small towns. My volunteer work at the youth center deepened. I became less of an instructor and more of a mentor, listening to stories, offering guidance that went beyond the proper use of a saw. I felt a sense of purpose there, a quiet way of giving back. Evenings were often spent on our porch, watching the stars bloom in the wide Midwestern sky. The silence between us was comfortable, a language of its own, full of unspoken understanding and shared history. The absence of my mother and sister was still an awareness, a dull ache, but it no longer throbbed like an open wound. The initial rawness had faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance. I understood now that true family wasn't just blood. It was forged in loyalty, in shared values, in the choices you made when the world demanded an answer. Ellie's strength was a constant inspiration, but I also saw the quiet moments of weariness, the deep breaths she took before a difficult meeting, the way she sometimes curled into herself after a particularly draining day. In those moments, my role was clear: to be her unwavering support, her safe harbor, just as she had promised to be mine. We had traded the idyllic dreams of a simple wedding for a hard-won reality, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. Roger Hanson's name, once a source of bitter anger, had receded into a distant, dark chapter. The legal battle, the public spectacle, it all felt like a lifetime ago. It was a reminder, though, of how far we had come, of what we had endured and overcome together. We learned to cherish the small victories, the quiet moments of joy in our everyday life, a shared meal, a walk in the woods, the simple act of reading side by side. Our conversations often turned to the future, not with grand, detailed plans, but with a quiet confidence in our ability to face whatever came. The world was still a complicated, often cruel place, but with Ellie by my side, I no longer feared it in the same way. We had learned that fear could be transformed into courage, that pain could be transformed into purpose, and that loss could lead to an unexpected, profound gain. The Midwestern landscape, once a symbol of my confined past, now felt vast and full of possibility, mirroring the expanse of our shared future. I had found my place, not in the inherited expectations of my family or the worn paths of my hometown, but in the life I built with Ellie. Our journey had carved out a new definition of home, one built on the unwavering foundations of our love, our resilience, and our quiet courage. We embraced our unconventional path, understanding that genuine happiness lay not in fulfilling external expectations, but in living authentically, with integrity, and with the unwavering strength that came from within. The scent of pine and rich earth often filled our small house, a tangible reminder of the woods that surrounded us, the quiet life we had built. My hands, once calloused from lumber, were now rough from repair work and the gentle shaping of wood in the youth center. Ellie's hands, elegant and precise, moved between her keyboard, her patience, and the notes for her next advocacy speech. We had both been stripped down, broken apart, and then painstakingly rebuilt, not by choice but by necessity. The laughter we shared now was deeper, less carefree, tempered by the knowledge of what we had faced. The quiet moral tension of the world, once a distant hum, was now a constant, clear note in our lives. My mother and sister remained in their silence, a blank space in my history that would never be filled. I carried the weight of that absence, but also the clarity of knowing I had chosen integrity over obligation. Ellie by my side was the solid ground beneath my feet. Her resilience was not a sudden burst, but a steady, persistent light, showing me that strength lay not in avoiding pain, but in moving through it. Our love wasn't a fairy tale. It was a testament to hard truths, difficult choices, and the enduring power of standing firm against the currents of injustice. We understood that some wounds never truly faded, but they could become scars that told a story of survival, a quiet triumph in the heartland.